I was standing on the roof of a shopping plaza in downtown Los Angeles, watching a line of cars circle the parking lot like sharks that couldn't find blood in the water. Down there, people were getting mad, real mad. A guy in a black SUV literally honked for a full minute before giving up and driving away. Another car just left, didn't even try. And I remember thinking, that's money leaving right there in real time. Then my phone buzzed. A message from one of the store managers inside the plaza. Weekend traffic is down again. Customers are complaining there's nowhere to park. I didn't reply right away because I already knew what was happening, and I also knew something they didn't. This wasn't a busy city problem. This was a system problem, but nobody saw it that way. Because a few years earlier, I wasn't standing on rooftops looking at traffic patterns like some wannabe consultant. I was just a broke guy working part-time jobs, bouncing between retail gigs and delivery work, trying to figure out how people in America could have so much space and still manage to run out of parking everywhere. My first real job where I noticed it was at a grocery store. Nothing special, just long shifts, cheap uniform, sore feet, and every single day the same chaos would happen. Customers circling the lot for 10, 15 minutes just to buy milk. People arguing over spots like it was life or death, and store managers acting like it was normal. One day, I asked my supervisor, "Why don't we fix the parking situation?" He laughed like I told a joke. "Fix it? It's parking. What are we going to do, build more land?" Everyone just accepted it, like traffic, like weather, unchangeable. But I couldn't unsee it, because it wasn't random, it followed patterns. Lunch hours? Chaos. Weekends? Worse. Rain, absolute disaster. It wasn't no parking, it was bad distribution, and that difference stuck in my head longer than I expected. I started paying attention everywhere I went: malls, fast food places, grocery stores, even small local shops. Same problem, different cities. Cars circling like they were stuck in invisible loops nobody was measuring properly. One night after work, I sat in my car outside a packed shopping center and just watched. 20 minutes, then 30. I counted cars giving up and leaving. I counted empty spots people never reached because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I had this thought that felt kind of ridiculous at first. What if parking isn't a space problem? What if it's a coordination problem? That was the moment everything started shifting. Because if it was coordination, that meant it could be solved. And if it could be solved, it could be built into something bigger, something people might actually pay for. I just didn't know yet that this stupid parking problem was about to drag me into my first real business idea and completely change the direction of my life. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because it was exciting, but because it was annoying. You ever get stuck on something so simple that your brain refuses to move on? Yeah, that was me. Parking, of all things. But the more I looked at it, the less simple it felt. I started doing what I always do when something bugs me. I went full observation mode. On my days off, I'd sit in different parking lots around the city with a cheap coffee, just watching. And I started noticing patterns nobody cared about. Not just when lots got full, but how they got full. Certain entrances clogged faster. People avoided walking long distances even if closer spots existed but were hidden. Drivers didn't search efficiently. They searched emotionally. Closest, easiest, most obvious. It wasn't logic. It was behavior. And that's where it got interesting. One afternoon, I ended up talking to a store manager at a mid-sized electronics store. He looked exhausted, like parking problems were just one more thing slowly killing his will to live. I asked him straight up, "Do customers complain about parking a lot?" He laughed. "Every day, but what am I supposed to do? Put signs that say, 'Please find a spot faster'?" Then he said something that stuck with me. "We lose more customers from parking frustration than from bad prices." That hit different, because prices are something businesses obsess over. Parking? Nobody tracks it. Nobody measures it. Nobody even treats it like a real business metric. That night, I went home and started sketching ideas. At first, it was dumb stuff. Sensors and parking spots, some kind of app that shows availability, even basic prediction models for peak hours. But everything I thought of had the same problem: Too expensive, too complicated, too unrealistic for small businesses. So I stepped back and simplified it. What if the solution wasn't build new infrastructure, but just understand existing parking better? Like which entrances get congested first, which areas are ignored completely, when people are most likely to leave without parking, how long cars actually circle before giving up. That's when the idea shifted. It stopped being about parking spots and started being about flow. But I still had a problem. I didn't know how to build anything like that. No coding background, no startup money, no connections, just observation and a growing obsession. So I did what broke people with ideas usually do. I started trying to build it anyway, even though I had no clue what it really was yet. I found a freelancer online who looked just as unsure as I felt, which honestly made me trust him more. I didn't pitch it like a real startup idea. I couldn't. It wasn't polished enough. So I just said, help me build something that shows how parking lots actually behave, not just spaces, but flow. He paused for a second and replied, like traffic heat maps? Yeah, I said, kind of, but for parking specifically. That was the beginning. We started small, really small. A basic model, nothing fancy, just simulated data at first. But even that was enough to show something interesting. When you visualize parking behavior, it stops looking random. It looks like patterns of failure. Some areas get overloaded instantly, others stay empty for no reason. And most importantly, people don't behave logically. They behave predictably wrong. I remember the first time I saw a simple heat map version of a parking lot. Red zones packed with cars circling endlessly, green zones sitting half empty just a few rows away. I just stared at it like, this is happening everywhere. But here's the part nobody talks about. Even if you find a problem, that doesn't mean anyone cares. So I started reaching out to businesses, shopping centers, small malls, grocery chains. My pitch was simple. You're losing customers before they even enter your store because of parking frustration. Most didn't even respond. A few replied with polite versions of, parking is fine, we've never had complaints. Which is always funny, because customers were literally complaining in front of their doors. Then I got one response that felt different. A mid-sized shopping plaza in Arizona. Short email, no fluff. If you think you can prove this, come show us. No commitment, no belief, just curiosity. That was enough. I didn't even think twice. I packed my laptop, got on a cheap bus, and went. Because for the first time, this didn't feel like me chasing an idea. It felt like the idea was finally letting me prove it existed. The plaza in Arizona looked exactly like every other average American shopping center. Big sign, too many stores, not enough coordination. But the parking lot, that's where everything told the truth. It was chaos, but quiet chaos. Cars circling slowly like they were trying not to admit defeat. People pretending they weren't frustrated while clearly being frustrated. I met the property manager near the entrance. He didn't waste time. So what exactly are you showing us today? I opened my laptop and said, not what you think your parking lot looks like, what it actually does. He raised an eyebrow, but led me to a small office with a view of the lot. I set everything up. The prototype wasn't impressive visually. No fancy UI, no startup-looking dashboard. Just a simple visualization of movement patterns based on observations and limited data inputs. But when I started explaining it, something shifted. I showed them peak congestion zones, driver circulation time estimates, abandon points where people gave up and left, hidden empty areas nobody naturally reached. At first, they were skeptical, then confused, then quiet. That's silence again, the dangerous kind. The property manager leaned in. You're saying people are leaving just because they can't find parking fast enough? I nodded. Yeah, and most of them don't even tell you. They just don't come back. That part hit him harder than anything else. Because stores track sales, they track foot traffic, but they don't track lost intention. People who almost came in, then didn't. We ran a small test. I suggested something simple. Change signage, redirect flow, adjust entry guidance, nothing expensive. They agreed, mostly because it sounded harmless. We monitored for a week, and something unexpected happened. Foot traffic didn't just slightly improve, it shifted. Not dramatically at first, but enough to notice. Less circling, faster parking decisions, fewer abandoned entries. Then came the email I didn't expect. The manager wrote, "We're seeing fewer complaints. Can you explain this in more detail?" That was the first moment I realized something important. This wasn't just theory anymore. It was measurable. And anything measurable in business eventually becomes valuable. But at the same time, I started noticing something else, something I didn't like. This problem wasn't small. It wasn't local. It was everywhere. And if I was right, this wasn't a side project anymore. It was a market, a big one. And markets don't stay quiet for long once someone starts paying attention to them. After that Arizona test, everything started moving faster than I was comfortable with. At first, it felt like progress. Then it started feeling like pressure. The shopping plaza wanted more data, more proof, more real numbers, even though the system was still basically a scrappy mix of observation and early modeling. So I did what I always do when things get serious. I worked more. Too much more. I started showing up at parking lots at different times of day like I was studying wildlife behavior. Morning rush, different patterns. Lunch, absolute chaos. Evening, pure frustration. And I kept refining the system in my head. But here's the thing nobody tells you about early-stage ideas. The more you understand the problem, the more painful it becomes to watch everyone else ignore it. I'd sit in my car sometimes watching families circle the same rows over and over, people getting irritated, giving up, leaving. And I'd just think, this is so fixable. Why does nobody care? Then one day I got a call from the Arizona manager. Not an email, a call. That already felt different. He said, "We showed your report to a few other properties in the area." I paused. "And?" "There's interest." That one word changed everything. Interest isn't commitment, but it's the first crack in the wall. Within 2 weeks, I had 2 more plazas asking for demonstrations, then a small grocery chain, then a mixed-use retail center. Nothing huge, but enough to see a pattern forming. And that's when I made my second big mistake. I started thinking I could handle it all myself. I thought it was still small, still manageable, still just a project. So I didn't build a team. I didn't formalize anything. I just kept running between locations, tweaking ideas, talking to managers, and trying to keep the system from falling apart in my head. And for a short time, it worked. Kind of. But then something broke. Not the system, me. I remember sitting in my car after a long day of walking parking lots and meetings, staring at my laptop, realizing I hadn't eaten properly in almost 24 hours. And I wasn't tired in a normal way. I was mentally overloaded. Because now I wasn't just seeing parking problems, I was seeing opportunity everywhere. And that's a dangerous shift. Because once you see a problem as scalable, you stop thinking like a person and start thinking like a system designer. That night, I got another message from the Arizona property. But this one wasn't about results. It was about something else entirely. They wanted to talk about expanding this beyond one location. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to stay a small experiment much longer. The meeting wasn't in Arizona this time. They flew me out to Los Angeles. That alone already told me things were getting serious. When I walked into the room, there were more people than before. Operations, finance, and a couple of corporate guys who looked like they hadn't stepped into a parking lot in years. The lead manager nodded at me. "All right. Let's talk scale." That word hit differently now. Scale used to sound exciting. Now it sounded like responsibility. I opened my laptop and went through everything we'd learned. Not just the Arizona plaza, but the newer locations too. Patterns were consistent, almost annoyingly consistent. Parking behavior wasn't random. It repeated across locations, cities, even different types of stores. Once you understood it, it stopped being a mystery. It became predictable. And predictability is where value lives. One of the finance guys interrupted me. "So you're saying we're losing customers because of navigation inside the parking lot?" I nodded. "Yes, not space, not availability, flow." He leaned back like he was processing something uncomfortable. "That sounds fixable." "That's the point," I said. Silence again. Then the operations director spoke. What would it take to roll this across all our properties? That question changed the energy in the room, because now it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about implementation. I told them the truth. We're still early, but we can expand location by location, learn as we scale. They didn't love that answer, but they accepted it. And then came the pilot offer. Multiple properties, real data integration, actual performance tracking, not theory anymore, real-world pressure. When I left the building, I didn't feel excited. I felt exposed, because now the system was leaving the test phase and entering the real world. Back home, things escalated fast. I had to bring in help, a developer, then another, someone for data, someone for client communication. The project was starting to look like a company, even if I didn't fully feel like the person running one. We built dashboards that weren't pretty but worked. We refined the flow models. We started tracking real behavioral changes in parking usage. And for the first time, businesses weren't just listening, they were adapting. Small changes at first, then bigger ones, then actual operational decisions based on our data. And that's when I started noticing something else. Complaints were dropping, not slightly, consistently. But success has a way of changing the stakes, and with each new client, the expectations got heavier. No one cared that we were still learning. They cared that it worked. And if it didn't, it was on us now. Then, one evening, I opened my inbox and I saw a message that made everything feel different. Subject line: expansion discussion, potential acquisition interest. I stared at it for a long time because I realized something simple but uncomfortable. This wasn't a side idea anymore. It was becoming something other people wanted to own. I used to think the big moment would feel obvious, like a movie scene. Confetti, cheers, some kind of clear emotional payoff. But it wasn't like that. It was quieter, heavier. The acquisition conversation started slowly at first. Emails, calls, introductions through investors. Then suddenly, it wasn't interest anymore. It was structure. Terms, numbers, valuations that sounded like they belonged to someone else's life. I remember sitting in my apartment, laptop open, just staring at a spreadsheet. Parking lots turned into data. Data turned into decisions. Decisions turned into money. A lot of money. And I didn't even react at first, because my brain was still stuck in the earlier version of me. The guy who used to sit in grocery store parking lots, wondering why everything felt broken but nobody fixed it. Now people were paying to fix it, at scale. We rolled out across more locations, then more cities, then full regional adoption. Parking flow optimization became something businesses actually budgeted for, not because it sounded cool, but because it worked. And slowly, I stopped being the guy walking lots alone. I became the guy managing a system that affected how thousands of people experienced everyday life without even realizing it. But here's what nobody tells you about building something like this. Even when it works, you don't really feel done, because problems don't disappear, they evolve. One night, after everything had stabilized, I went back to one of the original shopping plazas, same place where I first tested everything. I stood there watching cars move through the lot. No circling, no confusion, less frustration, people actually getting in and out smoothly. And I realized something strange. The problem hadn't changed. I had. I used to see chaos. Now I saw systems. I used to see frustration. Now I saw patterns. And eventually I saw opportunity where most people just saw inconvenience. A few weeks later, the acquisition went through. I won't pretend it felt like fireworks. It felt more like closing a long chapter you've been writing in your head for years. Not sad, not happy, just complete. And after everything, after the late nights, the doubt, the endless observation, the constant feeling that nobody else saw what I saw, I ended up in a position I never planned for. Not because I chased money, but because I couldn't stop noticing a problem everyone else ignored. And that's the part that still sticks with me the most. It was never really about parking. It was about seeing what people overlook and being stubborn enough not to walk past it. Before you go, hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable stories just like this one. See you in the next story.